Hello and welcome to episode 4 of my Kerbal Space Program NASA series reboot. Yeah, finally noticed the typo that has been present in the previous 3 episodes and fixed that. The dangers of using a template for your title screen. But here we go on our very last Mercury flight. I know I said on the last video that I was going to end the Mercury program at that video. However, a test contract came through that, looking at it, I figured I could kind of fake it off as a booster test using the Mercury type capsule. Excuse me. So this is what we're doing. I'm going to try to keep my testing videos to a minimum, or the testing missions that I record to a minimum, unless I find, like I said, something extremely cool. And looking at the views on episode 3, it looks like if that many people have stuck with me through that, then hopefully I can reward that patience by not wasting their time. But the mission parameter was to test a mainsail in a suborbital flight, as well as the LV-1 radial engines. I trimmed out some of the testing, but... Oh, orbiting Kerbin is what it was. And we thought it was suborbital. Quick little flight, and Charlie Kerbin is on his way back home. So yeah, I have started developing the Gemini project, which in real life, Gemini was the stepping stone to Apollo. All the techniques, Gemini's main purpose was to develop the techniques required to go to the moon. And interesting little bit of trivia, the Apollo capsule had actually been in design and production longer than the Gemini capsule. So by the time the Gemini capsule was out, it was actually a more advanced piece of equipment than the Apollo command module was. If I remember correctly, the gyros for the nav ball system had 4 gyroscopes in it, whereas the Apollo system only had 3. And the more gyros you have in a nav ball, the less susceptible it is to gimbal lock, which is when two gyros align with one another. Which is problematic because then the nav ball freezes and you lose an axis of rotation. So if, say, your X and Y axis align, then the nav ball essentially freezes. Got enough science to unlock specialized control, which gives me the Mark 1-2 pod, which it's in the game to replicate the Apollo command module, but if you abuse it enough by hauling a guy out of the 3rd seat, it makes a pretty good stand-in for Gemini, which is what I end up doing. And don't quite have enough to unlock any other tiers. We have our first Gemini test flight. Through escape tower on the nose. Trying to take safety as seriously as possible, because I am playing permadeath. I have not turned off autosave and quick load. I'm not using those to get myself out of tricky situations, but I am running 64-bit, and contrary to what the video shows, I am having some stability issues, memory allocation errors and the like, and I tend to live dangerously, but I'm trying not to live stupidly, because just the number of glitches and errors I can have crashes at inopportune times. I've left quick save and quick load enabled, but I'm not using them for save scumming. So that's the disclaimer. And you really won't know if I'm lying or not, because there's no way to definitively prove it. You just kind of have to take my word. But this is a fun little capsule I built using the octa-core system for universal storage. It's got an electrolyzer to break, I believe, water apart into oxygen and hydrogen. Also has a hydrogen fuel cell on it. However, as I am about to discover during this flight, some of the configuration tweaks I've done to make it compatible with TAC life support ended up breaking my fuel cells, so I wasn't actually making electricity unless the engines were firing. And during orbital insertion, since the engines are always firing, yeah, I didn't really notice until it was much too late. Well, I say much too late. We got everybody home safe, so that's what matters. We're just climbing up. Rather boring ascent, but it's a pretty stable rocket. Nice thrust-to-weight ratio, even with just that skipper underneath. Time to initiate the circularization burn. Whenever Gemini Kerman is so inclined. I am flying with Kerbal Flight Engineer, so I can keep the camera pointed at the spaceship more often than I'm messing around in map view. Somebody suggested I challenge myself and do some flights strictly IVA, which those are always fun, so I'm going to give it a whack at some point. Probably one of my Gemini flights, and I'm going to attempt to do a lunar flight, pure IVA. And for that one, I will post probably 2 videos. That'll probably, when I do a pure IVA flight, I'm probably going to post 2 videos. One that'll show the whole thing so everyone knows that, you know, on my honor, I did it correctly. But I'm not going to integrate that into an episode. I'm going to chop it up a bit. And I know I go on and on and on about the universal storage pack, and I keep having to correct myself, and I don't think I've done it in the video, but the science projects that you see in the universal storage are not actually universal storage. They are D-Magic Orbital Science, who has made parts to integrate with Kerbal Attachment System. Sped things up a bit so we can just get to the good stuff. But this engine doesn't have the thrust-to-weight ratio I really needed for that burn, so I'm having to use pitch to kind of manage my apoapsis and keep the spaceship pretty much right along it so I don't rise too high. I try to keep these low orbit flights to about 75 kilometers. This is a neat little telescope that comes with D-Magic and their Kerbal attachment, their universal storage pack. I figure a little tape drive, Kerbal Engineer packed away in a science bay would be more appropriate to this ship, given the given tech level. But yeah, you can see I'm just blissfully clicking away there as my electric charge is boiling down to nothing. Completely unaware of doing that, even though I've got the screen pulled up. I did correct it. One of the things that kept me from... I kept putting my own customized config files in, but the makers of Kerbal of Universal Storage have been nice enough to include that and... Okay. TAC life support and Universal Storage are now using the generic resource converter, so it kind of converts between the two of them without... It's kind of hands-off. I think the assumption they make for TAC life support to be compatible, which is mainly just oxygen, is that the oxygen in TAC life support is liquid oxygen, so it's higher density, but smaller amounts, so the same amount of mass. And the problem I was getting with that is with the normal mass values given for gases, for oxygen, hydrogen in Kerbal Attachment System, what with them being more scientifically accurate, is that just small oxygen tanks that go with Kerbal Attachment System, God, I keep saying that, with Universal Storage ended up weighing about 19 tons. And if you stick one of these wedges on, never mind the fact that 19 tons is ungodly heavy for a module in this game, especially one as little as this. Unless you put another one directly on the opposite side, you would have... Your center of balance would almost be outside the spacecraft. It would be pretty much centered around the Universal Storage wedge. So they got together, generic resource converter got involved, and everything's playing nice and happy now. I didn't know that at the time I was doing this flight, so But I did later upgrade. It's all systems go from this point on. They changed the artwork, I think, on the water container. It's not quite as scientifically accurate. It looks like a fish tank, but it's a little prettier than the old one, so I'll allow it. I think at this stage I've realized the dire straits I'm in as far as the electric charge goes, and I'm just trying to grab as much science out of the service module as I can and beat a hasty retreat back to urban. And off topic from this series though, but I do have another space shuttle video that I'm going to be editing together, and I'm going to try to get it up tonight, which is August 13th, 2014. I'm going to try to get that up tonight, just to show that my shuttles can actually do stuff instead of just, apart from just looking pretty. But I'm also I'm working on the shuttle on the side because it takes a lot of, I'm not going to say, it takes a lot of attentiveness and experience to fly it correctly and bring it safely home. And kind of bring it back to this video, is these early pod flights are very safe on return, so I don't, I'm not leaving the entire return recorded in the video anymore, because it's just tedious. You see me falling through the air, you see the heat shield heat up, and I pop chutes and he floats back down. And I'm not going to torture you and make you watch the space shuttle fly and land every time. I will be kind of torturing myself because I'll have to fly it. But the big thing about the space shuttle is that it's a bigger undertaking to safely operate in the game. And so I'm working on it in my default save, kind of reasoning that all the flights I'm doing there are the groundwork being laid by the technicians and engineers in this space program to eventually get to the space shuttle. Because the concept for the space shuttle went all the way back to the 60s. I'm gonna get this number wrong. I think it was the X-32 space plane was a lifting body design to test the feasibility of lifting bodies. And that's where a lot of the space shuttle development began. And the shuttle concept, I believe, was fully formed during the Apollo. It was complete and ready to go during the Apollo program, because it was during Apollo 17, while they were on the moon, that approval to actually build the space shuttle was given. And the program advanced from there. In case you may have not noticed, I'm somewhat of a space shuttle fanboy. So I'm putting a lot of effort into making sure that when I get to the shuttle program, I am able to do it justice. This is a testing contract, but it was relevant to the Gemini program, so I just reasoned we're doing a escape system test, which is exactly what it was. Gonna unlock precision engineering. And this time we're gonna do Gemini for real. They launch, they circularize, and this is simulating, well, this is my recreation of the Gemini rendezvous missions, and it's also, I'm throwing in docking practice. That's that ugly looking docking port on the nose. I say ugly, I actually think it's kind of cool looking. Is from Station Science. It's called the Attachotron, and it has less clamping force and less structural rigidity of a clampotron. You can kind of sneeze on it and it'll detach. They included that in the mod so that you can start building stations earlier, but you can't just go hog wild because clampotrons open up so much later in the tech tree. And if you may have noticed when I show you a brief glimpse of my parts list, I've got station science parts available to me, but because space stations hadn't quite gone into operation at this time, I'm holding myself back from using them. That and the fact that I want to start getting science from the Moon and Minmus and Duna and other planets and kind of get away from this collect everything around Kerbin stuff. We've performed a Hohmann transfer burn. I put the first Gemini ship into a higher orbit so that my second ship can catch up to it by being in a lower orbit. Relative velocity, a lower orbit, you will be moving faster than something in a higher velocity. That's how you catch things. And just a little fine-tuning with the RCS to get my encounters correct. But there are many, many much better tutorial videos on rendezvous and docking. I will probably do one in the future, but there's a lot of people who covered it much better than I can. People who have a greater depth of knowledge on orbital mechanics than I do. I've got engineering knowledge, but huge asterisk, I'm an engineering student and an auto mechanic, so there's just a lot better places to go. Getting that separation down to less than 2 kilometers is what we're aiming for. You may have noticed that I've got Buzz Kerman rolling along, who was an Buzz Aldrin himself being a integral part of the Gemini program. And I covered this in my previous video, but in my previous series, but it's just so cool that it bears repeating. Is that Buzz Aldrin, having been a recreational diver, had a lot of experience in kind of near weightless conditions, zero buoyancy and stuff like that. So his knowledge on how to maneuver the body to accomplish tasks, it's not a one-to-one conversion because in the water, obviously the fluid has a much higher resistance on you, and you don't just kind of, if you push off of something, you will eventually stop underwater. But he kind of had an intuitive understanding of the kind of conditions you'd experience under that, because the first Gemini EVA missions were actually dismal failures, and there was a lot of concern that if we couldn't figure out how to work in space, nobody was going to the moon. And so Buzz Aldrin, he took some time in the neutral buoyancy tank and really worked on the techniques and processes for operating the human body in zero-G. And his contributions are a large part of why the Apollo program was even capable of being launched. In fact, Buzz Aldrin wrote his doctoral thesis at MIT on the mechanics of orbital rendezvous. And in the real Gemini program, I don't believe they ever had... The problem with Gemini is that it so often gets overshadowed by Mercury, because Mercury was our first steps into space with manned spaceflight. And Apollo was, well, Apollo, that Gemini really gets short shrift sometimes, and I'm ashamed to say I can't remember, but I don't think we ever had 2 Gemini craft actually dock together. I could be fully wrong, but most of the docking trials done in Gemini were done with unmanned Agena target vehicles. But this is the Space Agency figuring out how to get 2 craft to come together and attach. And that first craft was just on fumes when as far as the RCS goes. I could have switched to the other one and made the docking, but wanted to stick with that one. And as we wind down this episode, we've got 2 Kerbals goofing off on the first tandem EVA. me finally figuring out the trick to use the spacebar to align your Kerbal to a new direction and then shut off as RCS pack so they just kind of keep flipping out for all eternity. But with Gemini now finally in full swing, we're really getting close to having to plan for our moon landings, which means I'm going to start sending some unmanned missions out to the moon to scout out landing sites and other fun operations. I enjoy doing unmanned flights, I actually do. I like probes and rovers and stuff like that. They're not necessarily the most interesting things to watch sometimes, but it's a skill set you need to develop for playing the game, so just kind of smile and nod while I do it. And I'm closing this video out with kind of my tribute to that famous photo and video reel taken during Gemini of the two spacecraft just maneuvering within meters of one another in a tandem orbit. Particularly proud of this. But with all that said, thank you for watching, stay tuned, and we will get to the moon.